Franklin had never minced his words in telling Mr. Churchill that he did not think that the British had done enough in any one of the colonial areas he had seen to improve the lot of the native peoples.
When Churchill wasn't in America, he relished his frequent transatlantic telephone conversations with Roosevelt.
He enjoyed the cloak and dagger aspect of it, I think, a bit, and disguising people's names. He always ended his conversation, certainly with the president, with the words KBO. Now, I didn't know what KBO was, and as I had to write everything down, I wrote down KBO. And then my colonel, who I worked for, said to me in a very irritated voice, "You don't have to write KBO down every time. Don't you know what it means?" And I said, no, I didn't know what it meant. Oh, he said, KBO means keep buggering on.
In June 1942, Churchill travelled to Washington again. The war was going badly. Singapore had fallen. German U-boats were devastating Atlantic convoys. The German army had conquered vast territories on the Eastern Front. On the 21st of June, Churchill and Roosevelt learned that Tobruk in North Africa had fallen to Rommel's Afrika Korps.
This was one of the heaviest blows during the war. At Singapore, we surrendered to inferior numbers of Japanese. Now, in Tobruk, seasoned soldiers have laid down their arms to perhaps one-half their number. I did not attempt to hide from the President the shock I had received. Defeat is one thing. Disgrace is another.
Doubts about Churchill's leadership began to be heard. A motion of censure was proposed in the House of Commons. This House has no confidence in the central direction of the war.
Well, that was the worst time of the war, really. And one thought, if he's going to be voted down, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to the office? What will the future be?
In the debate, left-wing Labour MP Aneurin Bevan attacked Churchill's leadership.
The Prime Minister wins debate after debate and loses battle after battle. The country is beginning to say that he fights debates like a war and the war like a debate. The government has conceived the war wrongly from the start, and no one has more misconceived it than the Prime Minister himself.
Churchill responded in typical style.
Everything that could be thought of or raked up has been used to weaken confidence in the government as a set of non-entities over whom the Prime Minister towers. They then undermine him in his own heart and before the eyes of the nation.
The motion was defeated by 475 votes to 25. For now, the critics were silenced. But Churchill was hurt. He needed a victory.
General Montgomery has gained a glorious and decisive victory in what I think should be called the Battle of Egypt. A bright gleam has caught the helmets of our soldiers and warmed and cheered all our hearts. Ah, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
The 8th Army's success at El Alamein in November 1942 brought Winston Churchill his much-needed victory. More North African successes followed.
I spent 2 days in Tripoli and witnessed the magnificent entry of the 8th Army through its stately streets. The whole of North Africa was cleared of the enemy. 250,000 prisoners were cooped in our cages. The sense of victory was in the air.
As the war began to turn in the Allies' favour during 1943, Churchill became more anxious about Britain's future place in the world. Churchill and Roosevelt met Soviet leader Joseph Stalin for the first Big Three meeting at Tehran in November 1943.
When Churchill arrived at the Tehran conference, he'd lost his voice and had laryngitis and was pretty miserable. But I gathered later that part of his bad temper was because he had failed to get Roosevelt to discuss a common approach to Stalin.
Fundamental political differences between Churchill and Roosevelt finally surfaced at Tehran. It also became clear to Churchill that Roosevelt now regarded Stalin as the more important figure in negotiations.
You felt sometimes that there was this kind of disparaging attitude on the part of Roosevelt towards Churchill. And in fact, what he was trying to do was to ingratiate himself with Stalin by making jokes about Churchill, but not only that, talking about their differences, both real and imagined. And of course, Stalin, probably to begin with, thought that this was a trick between the two of them, the two capitalist allies, to put Stalin off his guard. But in fact, he saw very soon that there was a split between them, so he was very ready to exploit that split.
There was one side of Mr. Churchill which was almost naive. He couldn't project himself into the mind of somebody like Stalin. And I always felt that that was very, very sad, that he felt he'd made a friend of Stalin, and all the time Stalin was laughing at him behind his back.
I realized at Tehran, for the first time, what a small nation we are. There I sat with the great Russian bear, with paws outstretched, and the great American buffalo. And me, the poor little English donkey, who was the only one who knew the right way home.
After Tehran, Churchill went on to North Africa. His health was failing. Too ill to travel, he had to remain with US General Dwight Eisenhower in Carthage. Churchill's doctor, Lord Moran.
"I don't feel well," he said to me. "My heart is doing something funny. It feels to be bumping all over the place." He was very breathless and anxious looking. The bases of his lungs were congested, and the edge of his liver could be felt below the ribs. As I sat by his bedside, listening to his quick breathing, I knew that we were at last right up against things.
Churchill had pneumonia and suffered 2 heart attacks. War and age were taking a heavy toll.
We were at one of the climaxes of the war. Although Moran thought the issue was in doubt, after a week, the intruding fever was repulsed.
Churchill would need all his strength. He faced a painful political reality. Allied victory would herald a new world order, where Britain's empire would be dismantled and its power diminished. But once again, Churchill showed his remarkable resilience. On Christmas Day, wearing his favorite dressing gown, he took his first meal with General Eisenhower. A feast of turkey and plum pudding washed down with champagne. Just 3 weeks later, on January the 18th, 1944, the Prime Minister was back at his desk in London, fighting fit. There was still a war to be won.